as well as Lionel Messi's first red card for Barcelona, and Liverpool and Man United playing out one of the most tedious top-of-the-table clashes you are ever likely to witness, last weekend also heralded Mesut Ozil's long-anticipated departure from the Emirates Stadium. For a man who played a crucial role in ending Arsenal's trophy drought and was at one time being compared with club legend Dennis Bergkamp, Ozil's departure has ultimately been a rather muted affair. Even if fans were allowed in stadiums in the Premier League at the moment, the Gunners faithful would not be able to say goodbye to the man who has spent 7.5 years in North London, since Ozil has been exiled from the Arsenal squad this season, meaning that even a virtual farewell hasn't been possible. All careers ebb and flow, and every player experiences highs and lows. But for Mesut Özil at Arsenal, the highs and lows have been more reminiscent of Lindsay Lohan in her early 20s than they have been of your average Premier League playmaker. Other than perhaps Paul Pogba, I don't think there has been a more divisive and opinion-splitting player than Özil, particularly within a single club during the modern Premier League era. But aged 32, and now officially a Fenerbahce player, what is Mesut Özil's legacy at Arsenal? And more broadly, and how will he be remembered? The significance of Mesut Özil at Arsenal began on the day in which he signed for the club. For the previous decade, Arsenal's approach to the transfer market had been one of frugality and caution. Particularly in the post-Emirates era, Arsenal did not compete with the likes of Chelsea, Manchester United, and later Manchester City when it came to the spending leagues. However, thanks to some shrewd business by Arsene Wenger and his staff, the Gunners remained competitive. Arsenal qualified for the Champions League every season, but their relative financial miserliness had taken a toll on the club's trophy count. Having won 7 trophies in 4 seasons, from 2001-02 through to 2004-05, Arsenal had gone 8 seasons without winning a single piece of silverware from the 2005-06 season onwards. In the summer of 2013 though, Arsene Wenger ripped up the post-Emirates Arsenal transfer playbook with the signing of Mesut Özil. It was a deal which went right down to the wire, with Özil only signing on the dotted line on transfer deadline day. Prior to the official confirmation, even some Arsenal fans had found it hard to believe that Özil would actually join the club. The paper-thin German had topped the La Liga assist charts for 3 consecutive seasons, and you probably had to go back as far as Marc Overmars and Emmanuel Petit in 1997, or even Dennis Bergkamp in 1995, to find an example of Arsenal signing someone who already had a reputation on the scale of Özil's upon their arrival in North London. The Gunners' record signing at the time was the £15 million acquisition of Andre Arshavin, although the late Jose Antonio Reyes had officially cost the club £17 million due to add-ons. Either way, Özil would cost far more than both Arshavin and Reyes' fees combined. The reported fee of £42.5 million made Özil the most expensive Premier League import of all time, and second only to Fernando Torres' £50 million switch from Liverpool to Chelsea in terms of setting a British record transfer fee. Despite the figures involved, it seemed like good business for Arsenal. Özil had topped the La Liga assist charts in every one of his seasons at Real Madrid, he was considered to be the talisman in Germany's ever-improving young national team, and he had been nominated for the Ballon d'Or for the last 3 years in a row. His departure caused quite the stir at Real Madrid, not least with the man his assists had so often supplied, Cristiano Ronaldo, who stated publicly, "He was the player who best knew my moves in front of goal. I'm angry about Özil leaving." End quote. Özil left Real as a consequence of Jose Mourinho's departure and Carlo Ancelotti's arrival, with the Italian seemingly not as besotted with the talents of the then 24-year-old. Nonetheless, Real were well aware of Özil's powers of creativity, so much so that they inserted a buyback clause into his contract with Arsenal. It took just 11 minutes in an Arsenal shirt for Özil to record his first assist. It seemed as though Özil didn't need Ronaldo in order for his miraculous assist statistics to continue. Olivier Giroud would do. It didn't take long for the German to follow that up with his first goal, and Arsenal went into the new year top of the Premier League table, thanks in no small part to Özil's frequent sprinkling of magic. His performances for both Real Madrid and Arsenal saw him nominated for the 2013 Ballon d'Or, his 4th successive nomination for the award. The only Arsenal player nominated for the individual accolade that year, Özil finished 16th in the voting, sandwiched between fellow midfielder Xavi and Bastian Schweinsteiger. This would be his 4th and final Ballon d'Or nomination, aged 25. Having gone into 2014 as the Premier League leaders, Arsenal's title hopes were dealt a devastating blow on February 8th, when they lost 5-1 at Anfield. Liverpool's quick and aggressive style of play had proved to be too much for Arsenal, and no player looked more exposed than Özil. The Gunners were 4-0 down within the first 20 minutes as an informed Liverpool team made a mockery of Arsenal's status as league leaders. This was the game that prompted serious discussion surrounding Ozil's work rate and what he offered out of possession for the first time, but once it had begun, that topic never really went away. The result seemed to knock Arsenal for 6, and no one's form suffered more than Ozil's. Liverpool went on a run of 10 successive victories following their 5-1 win against Arsenal, meanwhile Arsene Wenger's side won just 2 of their next 8 league games following the defeat. That wobble derailed any title aspirations that the Gunners might have had, and having occupied top spots in the Premier League on New Year's Day, Arsenal finished the season in 4th place, 5 points behind Liverpool in 2nd, and 7 points behind eventual title winners Manchester City. Ozil's performances became increasingly scrutinised as Arsenal wavered, but it was during the 6 games that he was sidelined for injury, between March and April, that the team endured their worst run of form. Wenger admitted that Ozil struggled in that Liverpool game, but was keen to stress that he was still adapting to life in the Premier League and that he remained a key player for the club, and that he had been missed during his time on the sidelines. Arsenal's title aspirations may have been dashed by a dreadful run of form, but their hopes of ending their 8-year trophy drought were very much still alive. Arsenal's 2013-14 FA Cup campaign was by no means a simple one. It started with a North London derby and ended with a final in which they were 2-0 down within the first 10 minutes, in addition to featuring victories against Merseyside rivals Liverpool and Everton along the way. Ozil scored after just 7 minutes in Arsenal's quarter-final win over Everton, but was sidelined for the semi-final, which the Gunners won 4-2 on penalties against Wigan Athletic. Their mercurial playmaker returned for the final against Hull City, but he struggled to make a real impact in the game, and he had been substituted by the time Aaron Ramsey scored the Gunners' winner in extra time. Nonetheless, in his debut campaign, the marquee signing had helped Arsenal lift their first trophy in 8 years. Ozil ended his first season at Arsenal with 7 goals and 13 assists from 40 appearances in all competitions, and there was certainly plenty to build upon for both player and club. The following season, Arsenal climbed from 4th to 3rd, although in truth, they were much further from the Premier League title than they had been the previous season in terms of their points tally. Arsenal defended their crown in the FA Cup, this time much more comfortably, thrashing Aston Villa 4-0 in a result which made Arsenal the most successful team in the history of the FA Cup. Ozil's campaign had suffered a pretty serious setback early on when he sustained a partial knee ligament tear which ruled him out for 3 months. The injury restricted Ozil to just 33 appearances in all competitions during the 2014-15 season, during which time he scored 5 goals and made 9 assists. The following season, 2015-16, would be by far Ozil's best in North London. He avoided any serious setbacks, and the frequent inclusion of Francis Coquelin in midfield helped to free up Arsenal's more creative players, Ozil chief among them of course. He set a new Premier League record for the most big chances created within a single season, with 28, smashing the tally of 16, amassed by Cesc Fabregas the previous season. Ozil also made 19 Premier League assists, coming almightily close to setting another Premier League record of 20 assists in a single season set by former Arsenal star Thierry Henry. It was around this time that opinion became increasingly polarised in any discussion surrounding the German. No one could deny his creative output, his vision, and the deftness of his touch. But now there was talk about where he ranked among Premier League greats, comparisons with Dennis Bergkamp, and suggestions that he was the best midfielder in the division. Contrasted with those who said that Arsenal could never hope to win the league with Ozil in their side, that you couldn't afford luxury players in the Premier League, and that Ozil had a habit of doing his best work against so-called lesser opposition. Although the 2015-16 campaign was Ozil at his absolute best, at least in terms of his time in English football, Arsenal failed to capitalise. In a season of strangeness, the Gunners missed out on a glorious chance to win the Premier League title, as Leicester City did the unthinkable. Arsenal finished second, but other than the satisfaction of leapfrogging Spurs late on, it felt like a hollow success and a missed opportunity, and there will be no cup glory this time around either. Nonetheless, it was a magnificent season for Ozil on an individual level, and his 20 assists in all competitions saw him named as Arsenal's Player of the Season for the only time during his 7 seasons at the club. The 2016-17 season would prove to be Ozil's finest goal-scoring campaign, including a virtuoso performance and stunning hat-trick against Ludogorets in the Champions League. Whilst Ozil often remained a joy to watch and his goal-scoring output increased, he was nowhere near as creative as he had been the previous season, in an Arsenal team that finished outside of the top 4 for the first time in over 20 years, dating back to before Arsene Wenger took over at the club. Despite a third FA Cup win in just 4 seasons, the poor league performances had led to a real inquest at Arsenal. The club appeared to be going backwards, not forwards, and fingers were being pointed in multiple directions. Calls for Arsene Wenger to be sacked or to resign intensified, fans demanded greater investment in the first team squad, and Özil was by no means immune. Question marks about his work rate and whether Arsenal could accommodate a luxury player, regardless of talent, had never really gone away. By the following season, he had entered the final year of his contract at the Emirates, along with Alexis Sanchez. The duo were Arsenal's 2 most expensive signings, the 2 best players, and losing the pair of them for nothing just seemed unthinkable. With Sanchez's renegotiations proving to be the toughest deal to strike, he was allowed to join Manchester United in a swap deal for Henrik Mkhitaryan, which put extra emphasis on tying Özil down on a new deal. In January, the club did just that, although it took a reported £350,000 a week on a 3.5-year deal, which made Özil the Premier League's highest earner in order to get him to stick around. Özil had been under the spotlight for Arsenal for years, but this new deal and Sanchez's absence meant expectations were ramped up yet again. In truth, Sanchez had been Arsenal's star man for the last 18 months though, and Özil alone could not drag this team to trophies. Nicknamed the Assist King for good reason, Özil is the type of player who flourishes with better players around him. Give him Cristiano Ronaldo and he will give you 25 assists a season. Give him Alex Iwobi, and he'll spend 70 minutes of every match looking as though he'd rather be streaming Fortnite on Twitch. The talent remained, and it would rear its head every now and then, Özil still becoming the fastest player to reach 50 Premier League assists in his 141st Premier League appearance, breaking a record set by Eric Cantona, but as he barely scraped double figures in terms of goals and assists that season, it became increasingly difficult to justify his defensive frailties. The 2017-18 season, in which Özil was handed a contract worth more than £60 million, was the beginning of the end for Özil at Arsenal in many respects. Özil was no longer Arsenal's talisman, but a flair player to be utilised only when the circumstances allowed it. In Unai Emery's first season at the club, in 2018-19, Özil made just 2 Premier League assists in 24 appearances, and only 1 in 10 in the Europa League. After Arsenal lost the Europa League final 4-1 to Chelsea, Özil is reported to have criticised Emery in front of his teammates. Many felt this had to be the end for Özil at Arsenal, but his enormous salary meant the number of potential suitors were incredibly limited. Another summer came and went, and Özil's game time decreased yet again. When his former teammate Mikel Arteta replaced Unai Emery, there were suggestions that this could be Özil's window of opportunity, and a chance to become a star man for Arsenal once again. The opposite proved to be the case. From January 1st, 2020 onwards, Özil only once played a full 90 minutes in the Premier League, and he ended the season having only featured in half of Arsenal's league games at all. When the pandemic struck, Özil courted further controversy by refusing a voluntary 12.5% pay cut, a decision which drew the ire of TV presenter and all-round nice guy Piers Morgan, among many others. In December 2019, Özil had also taken to social media to share a poem denouncing China's treatment of Uyghur Muslims and the humanitarian crisis surrounding the Xinjiang re-education camps, in addition to calling upon Muslim countries to be more vocal in their condemnation of Xi Jinping and his government. Arsenal distanced themselves from Özil's comments, but China welcomes criticism about as well as Henry VIII welcomed insubordination from his wives. Arsenal's game against Manchester City, scheduled to be broadcast that weekend on Chinese TV, was pulled from programming, and Özil was removed from the Chinese version of the PES 2020 video game. At the start of this season, things went from bad to totally bloody catastrophic for Özil when he was not just left out of the Chinese version of PES, but also left out of Arsenal's Europa League and Premier League squads, leaving him exiled from all first-team duties, and sending a clear message that he had no future at the club. Of course, throughout all of this, Özil remained the highest earner at the Emirates, and the joint highest earner in the entire Premier League. It was a quite bizarre set of circumstances, and one that I was often asked to investigate and make a video about, but in truth, no one other than Arsenal and Özil are likely to truly understand the nature of his banishment. Mikel Arteta was appointed by Arsenal thanks in no small part to a set of requirements and standards that he outlined that he would demand of players before being offered the job. Certainly it seems possible that Mesut Özil could have fallen foul of these requirements, and that's why his game time was so drastically reduced in the back end of the 2019-20 campaign. I don't think there's any need for conspiracies had this story ended there. However, to leave a player as talented and as costly as Özil, whether he fit your system or not, out of both of your squads entirely, when he no doubt could have offered something different to what Mikel Arteta had at his disposal, even if that was off the bench, seems to me to be too unusual to be written off as only being due to football reasons. Arsenal have denied suggestions that Özil was left out of the first team due to his criticism of the Chinese government, meanwhile suggestions that it was due to his close relationship with Turkish president and de facto dictator Recep Erdogan, who was the best man at Özil's wedding, presumably, never gained enough momentum for Arsenal to publicly deny them. So why Arsenal took such draconian measures against Özil, I have no idea, and only if he were to speak out publicly, which he has shown no signs of doing just yet, are we ever likely to find out. Whichever way you look at it, and whatever your views on Özil as a player are, it is a pretty sad state of affairs. Özil undoubtedly played some magnificent football in North London, and for a club that has often prided itself on the aesthetics and style of play of its team, Arsenal have rarely had a more gifted player on their books. Özil's legacy at Arsenal is difficult to assess. One suspects that despite enjoying arguably a more impressive peak in 2015-16, he will enjoy a less celebrated legacy at the Emirates than someone like Santi Cazorla, who spent a similar period of time at the club and also played very little football in his final 18 months, albeit for very different reasons. Financially, Özil has proved to be extremely costly for Arsenal, and his January 2018 contract extension has proved to be a particularly dreadful piece of business for the club. There will of course be those who say that Özil was never athletic or aggressive enough to spearhead a Premier League winning team, but his strengths and flaws were well known to Arsenal, and indeed to everyone else for that matter, before they signed him. If they wanted another Patrick Vieira, or even another Cesc Fabregas, they ought to have known they weren't getting that in Mesut Özil. Indeed, if they really wanted to get the best out of the playmaker, you could argue they should have signed someone like Thomas Partey much sooner than they did. Arsenal's midfield has often been fragile for more than a decade, and not all of that is Mesut Özil's fault. He probably played his best football for the club when Francis Coquelin hit a purple patch of form in defensive midfield, and Özil didn't just avoid criticism for his lack of defensive credentials, he didn't even have to concern himself with that part of the pitch. Whether he was good enough to build a Premier League title-winning team around is up for debate, and is ultimately unanswerable now, but Özil will go down as one of the most creative and gifted footballers of his generation. Were it not for his collapse in form from 2018 onwards at Arsenal, Özil would probably have the most assists of any footballer on earth since records began, and at the very least, he would be second to only Lionel Messi. Instead, he will go down as a one-of-a-kind talent, someone who could do things other players couldn't, and won a World Cup, but also as someone who didn't quite maximise their talents and spent far too long out in the cold. Özil played more games for Arsenal than Gilberto Silva. He won more trophies at the club than Cesc Fabregas, and he made as many Premier League assists as Didier Drogba, Juan Mata, and Eden Hazard in far fewer appearances, but his legacy will be dwarfed by all of those names. I wouldn't criticise Özil for refusing to take a pay cut at Arsenal. He supposedly asked for justification and wasn't given one, and quite frankly I would rather HMRC and a number of extremely worthy causes were given that money than Stan Kroenke. We shouldn't forget that Arsenal initially furloughed a number of their lowest paid staff and laid off their mascot at the start of the pandemic, with Özil offering to cover his salary out of his own pocket to save his job. And I most assuredly wouldn't criticise him for calling attention to the horrific treatment of Uyghur Muslims in China. Ultimately though, Özil found himself in the wrong team, at the wrong time, and quite possibly in entirely the wrong era. The Premier League doesn't allow for flair players anymore. Just look at the most creative players in the division right now. Whether it be Kevin De Bruyne, Jack Grealish, or Heung-min Son. All have fantastic work rates and can contribute to multiple phases of play. It is a reality, a sad reality perhaps, but a reality nonetheless, that there aren't many Mesut Ozils left in the modern game. Flair has been foregone for function, invention sacrificed for industriousness, save for those few rare gems who are able to combine the two. Mesut Ozil was not one of those players. He could do just one of those roles, although he could do it better than almost anyone else. And above all else, that is how he should be remembered. So that's it for today's video, which I assure you was far longer than I had anticipated, but I suppose there's a lot to unpick when it comes to the mercurial talent that is Mesut Özil. Thank you all for watching, and a special thanks to my friend Sam, who is an Arsenal fan and suggested this video idea. It was certainly much better than my friend Rob's suggestion of 7 footballers who are inbred, which is firmly set on the back burner for when I really run out of ideas. Thank you all again as ever for watching. Give the video a like if you enjoyed it, let me know your thoughts down below in the comments, and make sure that you are subscribed and have notifications turned on for HITC Sevens. Oh, and you can also find me on Twitter or Instagram by the username @HITC Sevens should you wish to do so.